Welcome to the Zandbergen Report, where wealth strategies and pop culture collide, featuring your distinguished host and certified financial planner, Bart Zandbergen.
Welcome to our show of Dream Chasers and Wealth Makers. We are thrilled to be back in studio today with a new episode of the Zandbergen Report. I'm proud to bring in the movers, shakers, and the difference makers who are passionate about what they have learned and what you need to know today. And today, Paul, one of my favorite time of year is to do one of our wine shows.
Ah, okay.
And what better way to do that than to bring in one of the premier wines and wineries in the country, if not the world, DAOU, and my buddy Josh Lavis from DAOU Wines. Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey, Bart. It's good to be back.
Well, I'm wondering if this has anything to do with the election that's going on today right now. For those listening later, we're taping this on Tuesday, Election Day here. And I'm wondering if we all need a slug of wine to get through this thing here.
I would say most likely. And if it's DAOU, even the better.
A couple of bottles, maybe. Exactly.
So for those who may not remember, Josh is a 15-year veteran in the wine industry. He is a CSW, which is a certified specialist in wine. And he's recently moved, so he's now covers the Central U.S. division. He's a manager for DAOU Wines. And the one thing I find interesting about you, Josh, I didn't know until I just reviewed your bio that you were going to go into law. So this is a far cry from the law. How'd that happen?
Thank goodness I didn't. One of the best decisions I ever made. Yeah, I was just graduated from college. Was trying to find myself. I was working for an attorney. Was considering potentially going to law school. Thankfully, the attorney that I was working for talked me out of it. I think he knew that my heart wasn't in it. He basically said, "Look, Josh, if you're not 100% in and you want to become an attorney, I strongly suggest you reconsider." And I did. And shortly after I got my first wine job, and it's, the rest, as they say, is history. That was over 15 years ago. So
it stuck.
Well, Josh, I got to tell you, you made the right decision, because I did go to law school for a year and hated it. Oh my goodness. And couldn't wait to get out of it and get back into radio here. So yes, he was right.
And we have, this is nothing against lawyer. We have a lot of friends, a lot of guests who are lawyers and it just, everyone has their calling, right? So
100%.
Josh, so glad that you chose wine as your calling. How are things? We actually haven't talked or got caught up in a while. How are things in the Midwest? How are things in the wine industry?
Wow. Believe it or not, there's a lot to be thankful for this year. I had my first child. My wife and I welcomed our daughter this past March.
Yeah.
Very interesting time to welcome your first child. Yeah. We literally went into the hospital basically pre-COVID, and then as we were leaving, it was a completely different world.
Wow.
But very thankful. We've been able to spend a lot of special time with her.
Yeah.
The wine business is actually amazing. I know it's been a tough year for some, but we're continuing to just have an incredible year at DAOU. But it's definitely, I wish I could say that for everybody. Between COVID and the fires up in Northern California,
it's been crazy
really difficult. I didn't know if you wanted to talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, we are going to, for sure. We're going to talk about the fires. A couple of things. I have seen pictures of your family and again, congratulations. And it's such a special time. So I hope you enjoy that. And I kind of thought you might say business was good. And I'll just share a little story. So early on during COVID, kind of during the grocery store scenarios. And, I made a comment to the checker at one point at Whole Foods. I'm just kind of shocked that toilet paper is the first thing that you're out of and not alcohol. And early on, she said, yeah, I really don't believe it. And then about a month or 6 weeks in, I was at the same store and saw her again. She goes, oh, I remember you. She goes, by the way, have you noticed the wine shelves? They're empty. So it went from toilet paper to alcohol, which kind of makes sense when you're locked in a house.
Absolutely.
So what I really want to talk about, many things today. And so the kind of the theme of the show is, hey, Thanksgiving is coming up. And so I want to talk about pairing both traditional and then let's talk about non-traditional. I think that would be fun. I'd love for you to spend some time just talking about DAOU. George and Danny, the brothers, how, give a little background on how DAOU became DAOU Wines. And then of course the fires, how that's affecting everybody. So there's a lot going on in the next 23 minutes. So let's fill everybody in on DAOU for someone who may not know who DAOU is. And then let's go from there.
Okay. Yeah. Fantastic. So DAOU. So the name DAOU is actually the last name of George and Daniel DAOU. They are Lebanese by birth. DAOU actually means light in Arabic. It's a beautiful name, beautiful story. I first met the brothers in Beverly Hills, actually, at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. They were releasing our most famous wine called Soul of a Lion at the Beverly Wilshire. And I was invited to go to this release event, and just to see the amount of support and people that came out, to celebrate the release of Soul of a Lion. And, I heard George and Daniel speak about their life story, being born in Beirut and, narrowly escaping, there was, the Civil War there in the 70s, one of the first rockets that went off landed at their childhood home. George DAOU was in a coma for like 4 days. Danny, his younger brother, still has shrapnel right next to his heart, in his face. And George told me the story when he woke from his coma. Danny was by his side. Keep in mind, they're 8 and 4 years old, and as an 8-year-old, George said, "We became men that day," which is just kind of blows my mind.
Yeah, that's deep,
very deep. And anyway, their story is very intriguing. They went through a lot. They were able to escape Lebanon, and they moved to Paris. So they grew up in France, and then of course came to the U.S. George came first to go to college, wanted to study engineering. His first love was math. Wound up all the way down in San Diego at UCSD. Graduated top of his class. Danny, his brother, followed him. He studied computer engineering. They started a company literally as young men, with the weight of the family on their shoulders, who were basically had no money left, and worked extremely hard with no financial backing. And then in 1997, they took this company. They started DAOU Systems. They took it public in 97. It was a tech company, so good timing. And it was the third highest IPO that year. A couple years later, they wound up, selling out their shares, selling the company. So they had, a lot of money in their back pocket. But when they were kids, especially Danny, his dream was always to become a winemaker. So this was sort of a means to an end, if you will.
Yeah, for sure.
And, it took him 10 years to find this perfect terroir, which he calls a rare phenomenon, and of all places in Paso.
You needed to find terroir. Not everybody knows what terroir means.
Yeah, terroir, it's a French word. It gets lost in translation a little bit into English, but it roughly means sort of environment. It could be the climate, the soil, the topography, the way the sun hits the vineyards. It's sort of an all-encompassing thing. It's kind of hard to define, but
I love that word though, and what it means. Yeah,
it's a great word. Anyway, we could probably do a whole show on DAOU, but
just terroir.
That's but just to sum it up, so we are a winery in the Adelaida district of Paso Robles in the central coast of California. We just celebrated our 10th harvest this year.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
That's it. Yeah. What we've accomplished in a decade is truly incredible.
Yeah. So, and I do want to move on, but because I think this is breathtaking. How did DAOU Mountain come about, and how did they get that piece of property, which is arguably the best location in Paso Robles from a view, and I think from terroir as well?
So this, I think, is just it's so beautiful and sort of ironic. George and Daniel were in the tech industry, and I actually asked Daniel this very question, how he found it, and I'm not making this up. He Googled calcareous clay soil. And that's important. That soil is the same soil you find in Bordeaux, which are some of the greatest Cabernets are made. But it's very rare to find in California. And Paso Robles kept coming up. And, and I don't know if he was kidding or not, but he'd never heard of Paso Robles. He thought it was in Texas or something. Anyway, they drive up there. There was this property for sale. They drove up to the top of the mountain there, or hill, and they sat on the back of their tailgate, and they just knew immediately that this was the place. And it turns out it was a very historic place. It was a site of the first commercial winery in Paso. It was called Hoffman Mountain Ranch. It was started by the famous Andrei Chelichev and Dr. Stanley Hoffman back in the late 60s, early 70s. So they bought the property, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah. And some great wines. Okay, let's roll into wine pairing for the holidays. Specifically, we have Thanksgiving coming up.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with a little kind of a story, and then let's expand on that. So when I took my certified somm test, the thing I was most petrified of was, not the academic part, which was the written test. The tasting is, I'm not naturally at, but I knew I could get through that. But the service for me was what I was petrified of, because I'd never worked in the service industry. So one thing led to another. I have a master sommelier who's my judge, if you will, or teacher. And at the end, it wasn't the most difficult challenge. He says, hey, after we went through the aperitif and first course and all this stuff, and then he threw at me as I'm, opening a bottle of sparkling wine and serving it properly. He said, okay, we're having a traditional Thanksgiving dinner. What wine are you going to recommend? So again, not the most challenging, right? So one would think. So immediately in my head, I'm like, okay, I was expecting something more difficult, but okay, this is basic. So I'm thinking turkey, kind of buttery turkey. So I thought in my head, I have two answers. It's going to be an oaked Chardonnay, more buttery. And then I thought I would also offer, hey, for the cranberry, I would do a Pinot Noir. Basic wines, basic meal, right? And so when I started to answer, and I said, well, as a matter of fact, I would have two selections for you. And he says, just one. So then I had to pivot, or not pivot, but I had to make a decision. It's a fork in the road. It's a decision. So I defaulted to the Chardonnay, right? And I went through that whole thing. And then on my test results, even though I passed, right? My test results, he said, you should have gone Pinot Noir. So anyway, I bring that in as a lead, because I think those are two of the classics. I'll let you expand on that, but I think we can go, even with a classic meal, we can go beyond that and bring in some other wines. And then let's talk about, there's meals that aren't classic for Thanksgiving, and we'll talk about some wines there. So I'll let you chime in.
I know that experience, Bart. I also took the level 2 exam, and service was I was so nervous taking the exam. So I know exactly what you went through. So bravo for passing. Unfortunately, I did not. So yeah, I've put some thought into this, and I'm going to, per your comment, I came up with a couple traditional and a couple non-traditional pairings. Right. For me, it's always tough. This was a tough one because Thanksgiving meals they vary so much.
Right.
Really, the only constant is the turkey. And you have such a myriad of different side dishes. Everybody has their own family recipes, or, they see something on social media that they want to try that year. So ultimately, I try to focus on two things when picking wines for Thanksgiving, and starting with the traditional pairings. Number one, I think about wines that remind me of the season. And I think of Thanksgiving, I think of like autumn spices and flavors. So like things like clove and allspice, cranberry, sage, things like that.
Cinnamon, maybe.
Cinnamon, totally.
Yeah.
The other thing I think about is, the kind of the main part of Thanksgiving, which is the turkey. And it's typically pretty mild tasting if you think about turkey. It's, usually the gravy and other things that make it, more flavorful. So for me, I look for wines with lighter tannin, typically, moderate acidity, but typically have a little bit bolder flavors, and possibly, if you like, earthiness, maybe a little bit of earthiness in the wine. So basically, for all the Cabernet lovers out there, myself included, you may want to keep your bottles of Cabernet in the cellar for this particular meal. Now, if you love Cab, ultimately, by all means, bring it out, but it's not the best pairing. So I actually two of my three were actually the same ones that you had pointed out.
Okay.
So I went with Chardonnay for one, for white.
Yep.
It's, the best examples in my opinion, come from either California or Burgundy, France.
Yep.
You mentioned an oaky Chardonnay. That's definitely, you want to find an oaky or Chardonnay that has a nice richness. It's going to really help with that turkey. And the turkey can be dry too, so you want that kind of creamy quality that a lot of Burgundian and California Chardonnays have. And then I went Pinot, to your point, and to me, you get a little bit more options here. I mean, this could come from California, it could come from Burgundy, it could come from Oregon. All make phenomenal Pinot Noir, and this one is probably your best bet.
Yeah,
I think for classic Thanksgiving.
Agreed.
And then my third is, to me, it's probably the number one all-American wine choice, and you probably are going to have a guess on which one.
Does it start with an S? Does it start with an S?
It actually starts with a Z.
Got it. Yeah, and it's a good Paso wine. Okay, go ahead.
So I went Zinfandel, sort of the all-American Thanksgiving wine, because at one point it was the most planted variety in California, and that's certainly not the case anymore. But this was sort of prior to Prohibition.
Yeah.
And so I think that one really amplified a lot of those kind of fall flavors, the cloves and the allspice.
So I hadn't thought of Zinfandel, but when you say it, it makes sense. I was going to go for the Cab Lover for a little more full red. I would have gone Syrah as kind of a good, right there back up behind a Pinot, but for the Cab Lover. And I think it probably would accomplish a lot of the same. Agreed.
Yeah. I think that is another one. I actually had that originally, but I took it out.
All right. So we're thinking along the same lines. Yeah. And then you started mentioning all the flavors, and then I'm wondering, I know it's more of a fragrant white, and I've done this before and I think it went well. What do you think of a Viognier as a white option? Mm-hmm. Too flavorful or fragrant rather, or you think it's okay?
I think it could work depending on some of the side dishes. I think maybe if you were having, let's just say you were going to have a ham instead of a turkey, I think it could be a good pairing. And my personal opinion, I'm not a huge fan of Viognier.
Nor am I actually, but trying to be unbiased here.
Are, right? Yeah. So I think maybe somebody who really likes that really fragrant, aromatic type of wine, that like a Viognier would be great, or like maybe a Riesling also.
Yeah. It's funny you said Riesling. I was just going to go to that. Obviously, as we know from wine training, one of the best, easiest pairing wine along with sparkling wine. And I'll never forget from one of my wine teachers, his comment was, the wine that I drink all day while I'm thinking about what I'm going to have as wine for dinner is my Riesling. So that's a good day drinking wine, lower in alcohol, easy to pair, easy to drink. So I think Riesling is a great choice for that.
Agreed.
So if we go now, I think we've hit traditional. We've gone slightly beyond traditional. Ham, you're right, that I think is often served. I think lamb, I know people who are doing lamb. That changes the dynamics just a little bit. We probably want a bigger, more full, heavier tannin wine. I think you can do a Pinot Noir, right? But you would probably want to step it up to either the Zin, either the Syrah, or you could Cab, or Malbec, Merlot, something along those lines. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think you could certainly do all of those. I went a little bit more outside the box on some of my non-traditional ones.
Let's have it.
Rosé would be one, actually. Pink wines are certainly extremely hot right now. I mean, they've been hot for quite a number of years, and they're continuing to be very popular. And especially in OC, I'm sure you have listeners all over the country, maybe the world. It's rosé season in Southern California year round, and it's actually, if you get a good dry rosé, I mean, they're crisp, they're fruity, they're dry, they're perfect to pair with.
Which varietal do you prefer yourself for a rosé?
Traditional rosé from Provence, which is like the the birthplace, maybe not the birthplace, but it probably
is. I think it is. Yeah.
That's like the place for rosé is Provence in the south of France, and they traditionally use Grenache,
right?
And then they will use a couple other great varieties. We actually, DAOU, you probably have seen it. We just launched our first rosé this year. We've been super excited about that. I mean, I think they pour it by the glass at the Montage, which is pretty exciting.
Oh, that's great.
But We make that with 95% Grenache and a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc, actually. Just a
is that right? Wow.
So it's quite traditional to add a little bit of white wine. So that's my pick for rosé. And then you got Beaujolais, which is interesting one.
Great choice. Yeah. That's like I know it's popular in Europe, but you don't see it much here in the States, right? Or maybe you do.
A little bit, but I think you're right. It hasn't quite caught on. And the thing about Beaujolais is, to me, it's not a poor man's Burgundy like Pinot Noir, but it's just south of Burgundy in France, and it certainly has a very similar quality. It's lighter, great wine though. Great pairing with things.
Yeah. So I was going to expand on that. So the southernmost point of Burgundy, and it's one I think you can serve chilled. I think it's lighter in body than the traditional Pinot Noir. But that's a great non-traditional choice. I like that. Yeah.
For sure. And that's another one I encourage people who are, who listen to your show that are, really into wine to maybe do some research into Beaujolais and Beaujolais Nouveau. It's kind of a cool story, especially Beaujolais Nouveau and tied around Thanksgiving every year.
Yeah.
The other one was Amarone.
Oh, so now you're really going out. Okay. All right. Talk about that.
So I think this one, especially if you're having like lamb or ham instead of a turkey, this Amarone from Italy, which is, gives you this kind of a rich, dried cherry, chocolatey, flavor profile. It can kind of accentuate like the sweetness of like the ham, for example. And it does, believe it or not, have a little bit of acidity, which acts as a palate cleanser.
Yeah.
It's a really cool wine. As you know, Maroni, it's quite expensive to make just because of the way they make it, with drying the grapes up on like straw mats in the rafters. There's just a tiny bit of juice that they get out of it. But that, to me, that was probably the most out of the box wine choice. But it can be really phenomenal wines.
Yeah. So I'll add one. This is just right off the cuff. It's not going to have the same oakiness, but this will be more in line, I think, with the Riesling. I am, over the last probably year and a half or 2 years, have become a huge fan of Chablis. Not the old school California Chablis, but the Chablis that really comes from Chablis, Burgundy, France. I love the Chardonnay grape, and I love the crispness. And that might be in the scheme of the Thanksgiving dinner. Maybe that's even before the turkey. Maybe that's at the salad course or during appetizers, or maybe instead of sparkling wine. What are you thinking, Paul?
I'm thinking I'm losing my mind here. I got two sophisticated wine guys, and they're talking about rosé and Chablis. I thought that was what I had to throw out 20 years ago when I started into wine here.
So 20 years ago you did, because the wine, the Chablis and rosé was different then.
Yeah. When did those two ideas come back in vogue? I heard rosé a couple times, and I thought rosé, those were box wines. That's what you got at Costco in a big box, right? Rosé and Chablis. When did they?
That was California's, or United States, probably, maybe not just necessarily California. That was their attempt at copying the very popular wine from Europe.
Yeah.
And not doing a very good job. But today, I am a huge fan of rosé, and I actually, in addition to the Grenache base from Provence and what DAOU has, I like Pinot Noir based rosé, and most wineries up and down California coast will have that.
So walk me through, though, because obviously Chablis is not a grape and rosé is not a grape. I mean, you're taking it's like champagne. You're taking some kind of grape and using some process to make something out of it here. So what do they do to make Chablis or rosé? Is it just less color?
So I'm going to start the Chablis, and I'll let Josh finish. So first of all, Chablis, like Champagne, is a region in France, and it's also part of the Burgundy region. It's the northernmost. The soil there is much different. It's much more versus clay. It's the white stone. What's the right word, Josh? White stone.
Chalky limestone.
So that itself is going to give the grape a different texture. So that's the terroir that we were talking about earlier. That's part of their terroir. Right. And then the fermentation process is going to be different.
What kind of grapes do they use, though? What is the underlying grape?
You ready for this?
Yeah.
Chardonnay.
Really? It's just a Chardonnay grape that they've tweaked and done something to here? They ferment it differently?
So grown in different soil, and then the winemaking process is different.
I didn't know it was a region, and I didn't know that it was just plain old Chardonnay just made a different way here. All right, and what did they do with?
That's why you got to stick with us, kid.
What do they do with old rosé? It's paler, so they must put less skins in or something. They must make it not as dark and colorful, or is it? What do they do different with rosé?
I'll let Josh take that one.
Yeah, so rosé is, it is obviously, it describes the color of the wine, the pink wine, rosé. There, going back to what you were saying, Paul, about the rosé in this country, there was something, I believe it might have been Beringer. It was one of the California, the old California wineries created a wine called White Zinfandel. It was actually by accident. So that's why I think a lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot, but there's still people today when they see a pink wine, they think of a blush or like this kind of sweet, almost, almost like a Kool-Aid type wine. But yes, traditionally, rosé is always made from red grapes. And of course, because red wine gets its color from the skin. So what they'll do is they will use red grapes and crush and then leave the skin in contact with the juice for typically a short amount of time to just give it a little bit of that pink. And you can have a pale pink, almost, you could barely tell it's pink, to like a hot pink magenta color, kind of varies. But rosé is nice. I sometimes call it red wine with a chill because, it can have a little bit more body sometimes. It's typically never aged in oak. If it is, it's neutral oak. So it just gives a little more of a texture than a flavor of oak. And you can have rosé still wine. And of course you can have sparkling wine rosé too, which was actually my bonus.
That I've seen. Yeah. And that surprised me because I didn't know. We went to, what's the big winery? Thornton's or whatever in Temecula. And they show, I didn't know. I thought champagne there was pink champagne and there was regular champagne. I didn't know you could make champagne. The champagne method of making stuff could be used basically with any grape, right?
It almost any grape. It'd be called different things, and just to make sure we clarify, Paul. So we're not talking about cold duck here. We're talking about actually.
Oh, that was my favorite, cold duck.
You need some, Paul. You need one of those things that sound effects.
Yeah,
that was a good one, Bart. That was a good one.
I see. Wow, we are out of time. But I hope that the listeners got a good feel for the wines that both Josh and I love, both traditional and non-traditional. I'm going to let Josh indicate his contact info. If you have any questions, you want to get a little bit deeper into the wine pairing or deeper into any questions about
and
DAOU,
tell us tonight
him.
If we are listening to the results, or we're still, or later, weeks, months, years later, as they listen to this podcast in the podcast version, we're still commiserating, win, lose, or draw, whatever happens tonight here. What's the go-to wine for tonight here? What's the go-to wine for watching election or for recovering from election? Yeah.
I'm going to give, since in the spirit of the election, I'm going to give a politically correct answer and a non-politically correct answer.
Okay,
yes.
Good. Right.
The politically correct answer is anything made from DAOU. Because our wines are incredible and we do not make a single bad bottle of wine. Everything is phenomenal.
There you go.
And the other answer would be champagne, just because.
That's Bart's go-to thing. You either celebrate or whatever. Yeah.
That's my go-to. Yeah. Sound like that's the call tonight. Josh, how can people reach you?
So people can reach me via email. It's very easy. It's Josh at DAOUvineyards.com.
And spell that.
DAOU Vineyards, plural with an S.com.
Why do I want to put an H in there so it makes it like Tau, or it makes it sound more oriental? Or do people do that, or am I the only idiot that tries to make it DH instead of DA?
No, that's not happened before.
Oh, okay. All right. So there you go.
Yeah, that would be first. But yeah, Josh at DAOUvineyards.com, or you can reach out to me on social media. I'm on Instagram at Mr. Lavis.
Awesome. Well, Josh, thank you for taking the time. This is always fun. And I hope the listeners got something out of this. Look forward to being back in studio again next week. Cheers.
Thanks.
Tune in next week for the latest edition of the Zandbergen Report, Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Catch up on our recent shows by visiting podcast.bartzandbergen.com. The Zandbergen Report is also available on iTunes, iHeartRadio and Spotify. Interested in being a featured guest on our show or have a question you'd like to hear us answer? Email podcast@bartzandbergen.com. The contents of this podcast episode do not constitute an offer of securities or a solicitation of an offer to buy securities and may not be relied upon in making an investment decision related to any investment offering Access Wealth Management LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Access does not warrant the accuracy or completeness of the information contained herein. Opinions are our current opinions and are subject to change without notice. Prices, quotes, rates are subject to change without notice. Generally, investments are not FDIC insured, not bank guaranteed, and may lose value. Brokerage services are offered through Tessera Capital, member FINRA.